Welcome to the Body Talks podcast with me, Dr. Brooke Sheehan. I'm a chiropractor extraordinaire who speaks the language of the body, not to be confused with body language. Join me on this show as I disrupt current beliefs about where health comes from and how you can discover your greatest health potential without having to spend hours away from your life's work in order to do so. Because reaching these levels of health is possible once you learn how to carry on a dialogue with the greatest creation to ever exist, the human body. By tuning into the whispers your body speaks and addressing them, you avoid the potential damage that is created when the body begins to scream, allowing you to experience healing in a whole new way. This show will guide you towards true health so you can continue to change the world. Your body holds the answers. I'm here to help you discover them on the Body Talks podcast, starting now. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Body Talks podcast with your host, Dr. Brooke, the Body Whisperer. I ask you this question every single week, but your body is speaking to you. Are you listening? Today, I am joined by a dear friend of mine that I met on Clubhouse probably sometime last year, Jessica Schwartz. And she's going to tell you a little bit about herself, but I'm really excited about this conversation and you'll understand why in a moment. Jennifer, do you want to tell us some more?
Yes, thank you for having me. I love the charm and invitation that your podcast name has. So I just want to say, love it.
Thank you.
Yep, I am a neuromuscular specialist. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm an entrepreneur and a podcast hostess, and I live all the way in Alexandria, Virginia, on the East Coast of the United States.
Nice. We're coming from two different parts. I'm here in Southern California, and so we got Pacific and Eastern time zones going. That is awesome. Very excited to have you here. So you mentioned the neuromuscular education, and, you know, I was reading a story about your mom and how you got into this work about 2 decades ago. Tell us more on that story.
Yeah, well, I really followed my curiosity from a young age. And what I learned from a younger age, when I was like 16, 15 years old, was that the nervous system is not something to just take for granted. That is so easy to do. I learned this because my mother had Lou Gehrig's disease, and it's a tragic story, truly. But what came of it was a real curiosity in like just kinesiology, I guess. It's just like movement and why we move and how we move, and the why and how is the brain in the nervous system. So that was just a curiosity. So I got into meditation, yoga, even alternative medicine, probably when I was like 17 years old. I was in, like, I felt immediate changes with meditation and doing mind-body work. I was a pretty high-level athlete and continued to compete in soccer until I was like 23. And so I sustained some injuries along the way as well. But I, looking back, I'm so glad that I found, mind-body techniques and self-care when I was 16, because with the diagnosis and the impending death of my mother, we were really rushed into therapy, into family therapy. And, I learned a lot about grieving and trust and self-love and real love and courage and willpower and dignity at that really young age. And so I really found like different types of yoga like really spoke to me. And I'd also already sustained injuries as an athlete before. I was like, I was one of those girls, the soccer players that had ACL reconstruction when she was like 15,
Oh my goodness.
And it's so common. And that's a really big part of my story as well. the ACL injuries and knee injuries in general. So when I um, was competing and I had already figured out that I liked being in the gym and going to yoga, I naturally gravitated towards a physical medicine as a career. So first I went to school just to be able to continue to play soccer. I really didn't have much academic interest at that time. And so I didn't,
Honesty.
yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't take any academic um, risk or anything like that until I was done playing soccer.
Mhm.
So so I was just like, what's the least risky thing I can do and stay on the team and get like
Yeah.
B minuses. That was like my game plan.
I
And
love it.
yeah. And so I got to I just started dabbling in the personal training industry. And I noticed very quickly, one, that my body was not doing that great because I had old injuries already before I was 25.
Yeah.
And so and so many of my clients like fit that category. They're, coming out of their playing career and I start working with them. And so I started dabbling in, physical therapy. I knew that physical therapy was kind of cool because I liked my physical therapist, and I thought those old school like kinetic machines were very cool. And I remember every time I was in there, I would stare at the graph and see, oh my God, my muscles doing that like that. And that was like part of the spark. I was like, wow, like no, that's my muscle doing that. And I can
Right.
see it. And so fast forward, a number of years, I found muscle activation techniques as just coming out of my own injuries. And I had a knee injury that was like really lingering. I had torn that ACL, had it reconstructed. It never fully like extended after that, which any of our sports therapy friends listening out there, they know that's kind of common with a patellar tendon graft on an ACL tear. So I was going to all these like, just doctors and physical therapists and chiropractors, and they were like, just stretch the back of your knee. I'm like, it's definitely not that simple.
Oh my
And,
goodness.
and,
No.
and then I accumulated a couple more injuries. Like I was chasing a boy and I started mountain biking and I fell off my bike and like had a small fracture in my vertebrae
No big deal.
no big deal.
Just
Started
kidding.
learning. Just started learning about the spine at that point. I was like, oh, look at this, interesting dive I get to go on.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot through my injuries. And then it started to connect with muscle activation techniques where you're using muscle testing 90% of the time and you're seeing changes in the neuromuscular system on the site within 20 30 seconds.
Right.
And that's because the body talks and it's responsive and the nervous system has this amazing feedback loop, and that if you know how to talk to it and whisper and tap into it, you have a lot of potential for rehab basically and like
Yep.
joint strengthening. So it really clicked, like the fascination that I was having with mind body techniques. I had found Kundalini yoga pretty early. I mean, I had like the white thing and like I went down that rabbit hole, like, and, but, I had a spiritual awakening at,
Yeah.
the age of 22. I mean, like, like how amazing is that, So
Can I pause you right there and
yeah.
just let you know how huge that is? Because most 22-year-olds are in the club, in the bar, doing their thing, completely oblivious to their own spiritual existence. It's all just about the physical. So kudos to you, girl.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Hey, I still had an alcohol problem, so don't you worry. It's all in there.
It's there somewhere, but you still found your spiritual
Yeah.
guide early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there was a lot of grief, a lot of depression.
Yeah.
So wrapped up into all this.
Yeah.
But it didn't change like this like drive that I had to get more plugged in to the feedback loop. It was the feedback loop that really turned me on from a very early age. And I think that's the long version of that story. I could probably go more, but long story, that post.
Yeah, well, I thank you so much for sharing that. I know that there's a lot of vulnerability in that, to talk about the young girl that is now experiencing the dread and doom of her mom's, like impending passing and all of these things. And you know a lot about the nervous system, and I talk a lot about it with my patients, that there's two aspects of the autonomic nervous system. So that is our like automatic, it's happening without us consciously thinking. I'm not thinking about, making my heart beat and making all my enzymes happen. I'm not thinking about that. The brain and the body is doing that. I think sometimes, I want to go grab that cup. That's my muscle. That's a different portion of the nervous system. But the two branches that we're speaking about with that, neuromuscular, what was the other aspect of that neuromuscular you gave it another.
Well, neuromuscular education.
Yeah. Like educating and doing that stuff doing that with the brain and muscle. But, there's the sympathetic, which is that high state of fight or flight stress response. We think we're running from a tiger. I don't know if it's de-evolution. I laugh sometimes because I think, as we've evolved as humans, we're able to initiate that fight or flight response just by thought alone. Like we could be thinking about our bills being due, or like somebody jumping on a podcast or whatever it is, right? And it triggers us to go into this fight or flight running from a tiger mode, where maybe or not even our grandparents, I would think even, generations further ago would literally be chased by a tiger, running for their lives. And then they come back to base camp and kind of come back into that rest and digest calming mechanism. So, it's, you found yourself, which I know a lot of people find themselves on, kind of like this chasm of, you're going through the grief and the sadness and the depression and in that state of fight or flight, but you found balance by going into that meditative state, bringing your nervous system back into that rest and digest calming mechanism, so that all of the blood isn't being shunted or sent out to your extremities so you can run, but it's actually being kept around your abdomen, around your heart, around your stomach. You don't digest food. People are like, I'm so stressed out, I'm constipated. Yeah. Like there's a thing for that. So I wanted to talk about that. And then I wanted to go back to another point you had said about brain retraining, or the concept of, you're working with clients that have a lot of post injuries, players or athletes, and how the brain can recreate neural pathways by doing certain exercise or certain movements and things like that. Do you want to talk more about that? How the brain can kind of be molded and shaped?
Yeah. I mean, I think a good way to just sum it up is emotion,
Yeah.
There's, when we have trauma in the nervous and neuromuscular system, meaning at a joint, there's essentially like an abscess around that area of trauma, and it's not just when it's healing, right? I just got back from the dentist and they want to do this like surgery, and it's pretty serious. It has to do with my sinus, and so it makes sense if I get trauma there via a drill on purpose, that it needs time to heal, and that every time I go to take a bite for the next 3 weeks, I might feel a little weird about that because I just had trauma there. And that makes sense to us. That I think would make sense to most people, that you would say, okay, you're going to get a sinus jaw surgery, and 3 weeks later, it might feel weird at times when you're chewing, because the chewing is like very, human, like we have to do it. And, so I think, that storyline makes sense. What doesn't make sense to people is when I say, okay, well, I know you've done the rehab, I know you've done, 60 hours of standing on a Bosu ball and balancing yourself and catching a ball. And, no comment whether I think that is like justice
Right.
for, an injury. But, and they just kind of accept that the injury's over. They don't maybe contemplate that there is like an imprint of fear and trauma around that joint.
Mhm.
And I would think that would even true of, C-sections. Like that's a pretty intense, invasive thing.
Right.
And most people just, really don't have a clue as to how trauma can affect so many different things, just even if it's just muscular, even if
Yeah.
it's just a joint injury,
Right.
not the emotional like identity crisis that comes along with you can't play your sport or I can't get my abs back.
Right.
So there's a component of that that can be very overarching in the whole theme for their like rehab and getting
Mhm.
back to sports. So there's a part there that we can address. There's another part like that's very mechanical, which is the muscle spindle can get desensitized. There are chemicals reinforcing pain like gates, right?
Right.
Like chemical, let's just call them chemical boundaries that
Mhm.
are protecting the area.
Mhm.
And sometimes that leads to less muscle activity,
Mhm.
less electrical activity, less nutrients and oxygen and blood flow, and joint starts to get old, essentially, even if you had that injury when you were 14,
Right.
So that I think so part of the work I do is like called pain neuroscience education, where we have very fun stories to tell so that people understand their neurobiology of pain. And it's the opposite of when you go to like the chiropractor's office and you see the
Right.
spine and you're like, doesn't it look perfect? Don't you want this perfect thing? And then
Don't
you
get
just
me
talk about
started,
the
girl.
anatomy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one way of, but the other way of going about pain is saying, okay, your spine might not be perfect, but let me tell you how pain works.
Mhm.
And that's pain neuroscience education. And we can use that for people with knee injuries, foot injuries, finger injuries, rib cage, spinal, all of the things. And I think I think it's a really underrated, it's not known, it's not well out there, but it honestly takes like 10 minutes of our session and it makes a world of difference. So it's more like a coaching program sometimes where I'm just
Yeah.
teaching people about their pain and how it works. And then secondly, the layer on top of that is the movement, the muscle activation, and the and the exercises that we do are, these things get me so excited. Well, we're able to target slow twitch muscle fibers, which are stabilizing fibers, which are oxygen eaters, like it
Mhm.
increases oxygen right to the joint. And that is so healing. And people
Yeah.
have no idea that is, when they get their like just random advice to like just move around and, lube up the joint. The only reason that could possibly work is you're increasing oxygen,
Right.
like it's just so overlooked. And like I don't like blanket advice by any means, but it's just like it's another really overlooked thing. So if you all got anything from what I'm talking about here, I think it's like we overlook the nervous system and its functions,
Yeah.
how it can keep us healthy or how it can overprotect us and make us over vigilant and create that constant stress cycle.
Mhm.
And there's a whole aspect of healing at the joint that has more to do with your knowledge about your body, this like beautiful thing we're living in,
Oh, so amazing.
and the that that when we increase oxygen and blood flow to almost any area of the body, it can heal. And so many
Absolutely.
of the things, just, all the things that were, anti on Instagram are just things that are like blocking, and
Yeah.
just keeping us from that healing state and recovery. And so I'm a big advocate for like recovery. I talk a lot about that. And that's how I kind of open the door to the body talks to you,
Yes.
whereas you're starting with it.
Jennifer, those are amazing points. I just love what you share there. I have like so many things going on in my mind as you're talking, and I'm like getting, revved up, excited about this because
Sure.
I feel like so many people kind of get caught in these boxes per se, like, oh, insurance is allowing me to see a PT, but the PT can't address the hip because in the paperwork, it's only the knee. And it's like the knee is separate from the ankle and the foot or the hip or any other attachment to the body when everything works together. So you were saying how teaching them that their body is talking and the nervous system, it's important to have the nervous system involvement in healing those injuries or those areas where there's weakness, and then bringing in oxygen and doing different exercises to help the body heal. And so I just think it's so incredible. You and I are using different words to speak a very similar message in the sense that everybody is extremely unique and there's no one size fits all. And just because something worked with one client or one patient or one person that you read about on the internet doesn't mean that that is right for you. And it's important to find a practitioner, a coach, somebody to really help act as a guide to get you to that point. Because a lot of people, and I'm sure you've seen this in your work sometimes, are so detached from who they are. They're not even physically in tune with their body. They just know when they feel pain. And pain is the absolute, I wouldn't say it's the final end of the road, because obviously there is other disease and cancer and other things that happen as a result of being at the final end of the road. But pain is like a big indicator that there was something else going on prior that you weren't giving attention to. And so it's about learning to kind of pull it back a little bit, giving attention to the things that you may not even be noticing, but by being tuning in a little bit more. And I do talk about this on another episode of the Body Talks podcast about this or that, and really starting to establish a dialogue with your body and asking it what it wants. Do I want coffee this morning or do I want tea? And these are small inconsequential decisions. Or do I want to go for a run, or do I want to do an at-home workout, or do I, all of these things. These are methods of learning how to really develop a good, strong relationship with yourself. And one of the things you were mentioning about, oh my goodness, why did I just lose my train of thought? What was the first part of the three things that you had talked about?
It was really about overlooking the nervous system as a part of the healing process.
Oh, I can't. I'm so sorry. I lost it. But, I can ramble and keep going on and on. But
no worries.
You and I are so similar in that. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that, for those of you listening, understanding what Jennifer is saying and what I'm saying is very much coming back to acknowledging that there is a reason for things to be happening the way they are. Here's the point. It came back. You mentioned how you spend a lot of time, in the beginning with your clients to talk to them about the philosophy or the psychology of pain, essentially, right? And how pain works. And so by being educated and having the knowledge base on what's going on, I feel like it really helps empower people, because then they feel like they're not in the dark. I talk about this quite a bit, about, people getting really freaked out. Like they feel like they have, chest pain. Their left arm is going numb. They're having difficulty breathing. They're and then of course, what does the brain do? The brain in its magnificent glory starts to rev up all engines. The whole nervous system is going, you know, I'm having a heart attack. The prefrontal lobe, our behavior, emotion, thought, reasoning center of our body shuts down completely. And then we start to like really go into higher panic attack mode. And we think, oh my God, life is over. And we go to the doctor, we go to the emergency room, we do all this, heart comes back, you know, normal, check the box, everything. They're still having those pain, but for some reason now they're like down here and they're able to go, okay, did something happen? What's going on? You know, like a lot of times hiatal hernia, stomach getting caught up, you know, like up into the diaphragm could cause those symptoms. So to say, I just love that you are educating your patients all about pain before you even begin to touch any sort of muscle or do any kind of kinesiology work on them. And it's just, I love that.
Yeah. Well, it's not like always the first thing, you know, I got to know when is the right time. I just say, like, I basically think of it in 10-minute chunks. Because people can't handle the whole like, hey, everything you know about pain's wrong conversation. and you've been treating your body like a dumpster. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's like that's, you know, because we've had also probably clients and patients that they think too much when you give them that information. And then I forget to follow up. I'm like, oh, I just told them that. It didn't like blow up their brain and like make them second guess theirself every move in their surgeries. And, you know, it's no big deal. So if I, you know, I have to make myself responsible to actually follow up with them and see if, you know, maybe the education, that was the shock to the system. You know, I took them way far out from their normal operating. Because, you know, some people, even though walking into my door is definitely like, I'm not the first stop for your injury, like at all.
Right.
And if I sense that you are, I have a referral. I have multiple referrals. I'm like, no, you kind of need to do some of the traditional stuff first, unless they're like a student, that maybe a teenager or something like that. But for the most part, I'm not your first stop. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's, anyways, there's a lot to digest when it comes to undoing these, what is it? These stories, these assumed truths about your injuries and your muscle pain and your tightness, by the way, you know? And like it's just so interesting to have somebody on the table and they've had a high hamstring injury 4 years ago, and every day they understand that their hips are tight and the hamstrings are tight. So, you know, they'll foam roll, they'll, you know, do the self massage techniques, they'll do some stretching, and then when they'll come and work with me, and within 10 minutes we have a change, we have a result for their hamstring. And that alone's a lot for people to process, I think. It's so it's huge. Like, yeah. And so I think education is so important in that whole process. One, so that maybe they can start to appreciate that the vastness of the nervous system and what it can play in our healing process. One of the things I see that gets overlooked a lot in regards to like that whole conversation is that the muscles, the soft tissues, they have a healing quality about them. You know, they actually can get injured and we can heal them. People understand that from the I work out, I'm sore perspective, right? But is there a way that we can start to apply this to our whole body? Right. If we have a healthy nervous system, one that is flexible between autonomic and, you know, the parasympathetic, and can we promote the healthiness and the flexibility of that system to go between, fight, flight, freeze, and relax, rest, and digest, and laugh and connect. And
Yeah, of course.
can we promote that? That's my question. I mean, I think you're on board, but
Yeah, I'm on board, but it's a great question for anybody listening, can that be,
the
like you
goal.
said, absolutely. And it should be the goal, because it's not about being high or low, or, high sympathetic, low parasympathetic, but really kind of bringing them into balance and knowing they're not going to both be even at the same time, because there's certain instances in our lives where stress is important, and it's a defense mechanism. And if you see your toddler running across the street, you're not going to be sitting there digesting your food like la la la, like that's a time when that system revs up and you run and you grab the child, like so this, I guess I'm not a huge fan of the term balance for just in that sense, because it's like there's times when, like, we're I don't know that there's ever a time that we're actually fully in balance. Like, if there's aspects of our lives that we're, if you're at the gym and you're working out, you're fully devoted, you're at the gym working out, you're not recording a podcast, or if I'm working with patients and I'm doing this, I'm not at the gym, or there's moments in our lives where we're all in on whatever we're doing, and then we come back and there's balance in how we're doing it versus when it's actually happening. So to get back to the nervous system, unless you have anything to say about that.
Well, I mean, I like that you're kind of like working through the definition yourself. Like, you're like, I got trouble with it on one side, but like, I think it's really important on the other side. And I totally agree with that. I use the term balance with my clients when we're about to go into an exercise, when we're about to when we're doing neuromuscular exercise, it's almost like an invite into, here's a new sensation. Isn't it going to be cool? So I have to like sell people on it. I'm like, like, I'll give you candy. It's like that kind of like attitude towards, like, I'm going to welcome you in. And I think balance is one of those words that is like very welcoming. You're like, yeah, I want that.
That's true. Very true. I see. You're right when you say I'm struggling with it, because it's like I don't want people to get caught and just be like, well, I need to have balance, because there's certain areas where there's not balance, but there is areas in life where you do need to have that.
Well,
so
how about this?
like
you
that.
come on my podcast and that'll be our subject. We can just go down the balance rabbit hole.
Let's do it. That'll be awesome. Okay, so as we wrap up, is there any muscle activation techniques or exercises that I know you do a lot in in person with people, but is there any couple, or maybe a 1-2 that you can share with the listeners?
Yeah, I'd back it up one step, and I would say one of the coolest things you can do for your gym performance, sports performance, body performance, because not everybody's like, I want to go run. Like, yeah, maybe you want to get on the floor and paint a canvas. Maybe that's your sport. And so I don't want to exclude anybody. Okay. And because I think like one of the most important things that we can do to improve performance, whether it's getting up and off the floor or swinging a bat of some sort, is we can actually check in with our nervous system and do range of motion assessments on ourselves. I think and so you have to do those assessments with an intervention in mind, right? So most people that like come my way and they've had the sports injuries, like they usually have something that they're already using that might actually be effective. The foam roller might work for them, and it doesn't work for everybody, but it might work for them, but they have no way to measure it. So I'm an advocate for learn how to measure. So if you start taking your own range of motion assessments while you're exercising, in between sets, before you step on the pitch or the golf course, it is a really good idea to have a few things like, okay, I know my hip gets tight, but how much does it actually move? And that's a range of motion assessment. And then literally doing that on the other side and learning, okay, so my left hip didn't move as far and it was kind of sloppy getting there. Just information, nothing's wrong. My right one's tight, but it kind of moved okay. That's weird. That's information. And then you can actually just like do your stretch, whatever, on your right hip. Let's say it takes you 30 seconds, and then you just recheck it. If your hip moves better on both sides, you've made a change and your neuromuscular system knows about it and your brain knows about it. Yeah. So that's my back. Yeah. And then besides that, one of my favorite, the biggest tools that we give our clients. So one of my favorite exercises is a posterior pelvic tilt. And learning how to control that without using your femurs or your glutes or your hip flexors. And
oh my God.
Yeah. So when we do that in the session, it takes us 20 minutes to really get it with people. And we use little activation exercises to facilitate it. But, it can be done without my hands. You can do it with, you should be doing it on your own is what I'm saying. Every athlete I've worked on needs a connection down to their posterior pelvic tilt, which is actually the butt going like down and the pelvis coming up. And so really what that is like, you can just think of it as abdominal activation and tensioning, like getting more tension into the intra-abdominals. And, then it turns into a diaphragm exercise, and then it turns into like a very fluid controlled crunch. So it kind of, but that all kind of goes down to like one of the basics, the most basic of mat Pilates is that posterior pelvic tilt. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I hope you guys found this useful, found this educational, and just got a lot of value from this, because I sure did. This is a fun conversation.
So fun.
I know. I love it. We totally speak the same language. Where can people get connected with you? Like, how can they stay in touch and reach out and learn more about your work and possibly come and see you if they're out there in Virginia?
Okay. Yeah. I have my studio is impactyourfitness.net. And on Instagram, I am Jennifer_Simone_Schwartz. And my website's the same, Jennifer Simone Schwartz. And then we have the podcast, which is thinkfitbefitpodcast.com.
I love it. And I'll put all the show notes and everything in the, or I'll put all of that in the show notes below. So thank you all for your time. Anything else you want to say before we jump off?
No, well, I'll say one thing. I mean, I think the call to action here, the body talks and you can listen, is just so beautiful. And it's really an honor to help, share that message with you. And it's also really inspiring to see your vulnerability on the podcast and watch you kind of learn and think through things and be able to like grow. You're interested in growth, and I really admire that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Jennifer. Thank you. Thank you all, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Body Talks podcast with me, Dr. Brooke Sheehan, where you're learning to pay close attention to the whispers your body is speaking so you can live a life fully expressed physically, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally without spending time and money on healthy items that aren't right for you. You're uniquely made, and your healthcare needs should reflect that. To learn more or how you can work with me, visit drbrooksheehan.com. That's Brooke without an E, and discover your answers today.